Recently, there has been a significant increase in murder cases, particularly those where the killer used extreme violence. We began asking ourselves if these crimes were being carried out under the guidance of organizations or if the people committing them were mentally disturbed. This all came to a head when a shocking crime occurred in Fayoum, shaking all of Egypt, where a man killed his neighbor with an axe right in front of his wife and son. It was one of the most gruesome murders. However, a similar incident happened again here, but this time it was clear that we were dealing with a serial killer or a psychopath. This was the speech of Colonel Mustafa. He continued speaking, saying, "A month ago, we received a report of a horrific crime in a somewhat isolated area in Suez. A team from the local department was dispatched to investigate the report, and when they arrived, they found the body of a man in his 40s named Allah. But the issue wasn't just the murder, it was the condition of the body. The killer used an axe and struck the victim in the face more than 20 times, indicating extreme violence. The victim's daughter witnessed the entire crime, and she is now in the hospital, suffering from a severe nervous breakdown that has rendered her speechless. She is currently undergoing treatment. At the time, we thought this person was seeking revenge against the victim for some reason, due to the violent nature of the killing. We assumed the victim might have wronged this person in some way, leading to this act of revenge. However, we realized we were wrong, because just a week later, another crime occurred in the same manner, this time in a compound in New Cairo. The killer entered the compound disguised as a delivery worker, riding a motorcycle and wearing a cap. He arrived at Villa number 7, knocked on the door, and within seconds, the door opened. As soon as the man entered, the killer followed him inside, and in less than 5 minutes, the killer came out, got on his motorcycle, and left. The neighbors later discovered that Mr. Rashid, their neighbor, had been murdered with 12 axe blows to the face. When we investigated the restaurant name that appeared on the cameras, we found out that it had closed down a year ago. It became clear that these two crimes were related, and so we began investigating the victims' backgrounds, their relationships, and whether they had any enemies. The answer was no. Allah was a modest school teacher with no known enemies, living alone with his daughter after his wife passed away. As for Rashid, he was newly married with no known enemies, and he had just returned from abroad. This left us puzzled until the third crime occurred. This time, the victim was a famous businessman named Hazem. Hazem's company's security cameras captured the same person, the killer, riding a motorcycle. He arrived at the company at 1 a.m., and according to his colleagues, Hazem was known for staying late at the office. The killer entered the company and murdered Hazem with 25 axe blows to the face before fleeing. But this time, a connection was found between the second and third crimes. Allah and Hazem were cousins and had been business partners 5 years ago. Colonel Mustafa finished speaking and looked at me, saying, "You're the one who will handle this case, Yusuf. I expect outstanding results from you, just like always, and I want the killer caught as soon as possible. I don't need to tell you that this has become a public concern, and people are terrified of the killer who is roaming the streets, threatening their safety. I assure you, sir, I will live up to your expectations, and I will solve this case in the shortest time possible. I trust you, and that's why I've chosen you for this mission. You'll find all the investigation files and case details on your desk. By the way, Major Ashraf was handling this case before you, so push yourself, my hero. I'm expecting a lot from you." I left Colonel Mustafa's office and headed to my desk, where I found a large file waiting for me. I sat down, opened the file, and began reading. After half an hour of reading, I realized I was dealing with a serial killer who knew exactly what he was doing, studying every move he made. It was impossible that he was doing this because he was mentally ill. There had to be a reason behind these crimes. I needed to connect the dots and figure out what was driving the killer to commit these murders. My first step was to visit the hospital, where I wanted to meet the daughter of the man who witnessed the first crime. who, by the way, is named Nesma. When I arrived at the hospital, I discovered that Nesma was isolated in a room by herself, but was beginning to recover from the shock. She had started responding to the doctors in terms of eating and drinking, but she still wasn't speaking. I took a notebook and pen with me and entered Nesma's room. She is 15 years old, meaning she is fully aware of everything that happened that day, and if she could talk, or at least write on the paper, she could surely help me. I approached her, pulled up a chair, and sat down. I began talking to her about the day of the incident, but I was surprised by her reaction. She broke down in tears, clearly still traumatized. The doctors rushed into the room, gave her a sedative, and asked me not to return until she had fully recovered. To be honest, I was feeling frustrated. The only person who could solve this puzzle wasn't talking because she was traumatized by her father's death. I returned to my office and began looking into the case from a different angle. But as I sat there, I received a phone call about a new crime that had just occurred in Madi. I quickly left my office, got into my car, and headed to the crime scene. When I arrived, I found people gathered around a building, with an ambulance already on the scene, as well as forensic and criminal investigation teams. When I entered the building, I found a body on the floor, and to be honest, it was a horrific sight. The victim's face was horribly disfigured from multiple blows, about 15 axe strikes to the face. After the forensic and criminal investigation teams finished their work and the ambulance took the body away, we began investigating the case. From here, many things began to surface. The victim's name was Radwa, and she was the personal secretary of Hazem, the third victim. The neighbors mentioned that Radwa had been acting strangely recently and that she had filed a police report stating that she had received death threats. At the time, she had submitted a letter which read, "Everyone who mocked me will pay dearly, and you're the first, Radwa. Wait for your turn. You'll die soon." What I understood from this letter was that Radwa was one of those who mocked someone, which gave that person a psychological complex and made them decide to kill her and anyone else who mocked them. But there had to be a stronger reason behind this. Surely these people had done something worse than just bullying. As I was deep in thought, there was a knock on the door, and a soldier entered to tell me, "Someone left a letter for you and left quickly." Who was this person and why didn't you stop him? "He was in a hurry, sir. He just dropped the letter off and left." "All right, you can go now." I opened the letter and found several photos inside, a picture of a half-disfigured face and other pictures of a house and an older man in his 50s. There was writing on the back of the older man's photo, which read, "I hope you can save him, Yusuf, and catch me this time," along with an address. I rushed out the door, got into my car, and sped to the address, arriving to the sound of a girl screaming from inside the house. When I entered, I was met with